In the winter of 1846, a physician named Dr. Victor Blackwood meticulously documented the spread of a mysterious disease throughout the mining settlement of Silvercliff, Colorado. Over 4 months, 89 people died from symptoms no local doctor could identify or treat. What made this outbreak uniquely horrifying wasn't just its deadliness, but the discovery that Dr. Blackwood himself had deliberately engineered and spread the disease as part of a calculated experiment to study infection patterns in isolated communities. 3 separate government investigations failed to explain how one trusted doctor managed to kill nearly 100 people before anyone suspected his involvement. Tonight, we're going to uncover the truth behind the Silvercliff Epidemic, a story that reveals the darkest corners of medical history and the terrifying power that comes when scientific ambition operates without moral restraint. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The truth about Silvercliff begins in the autumn of 1846, when this small mining community in the Colorado Territory was just establishing itself as a promising settlement. Located in a narrow valley surrounded by the imposing Rocky Mountains, Silvercliff had grown quickly after significant silver deposits were discovered in 1844. By 1846, it had attracted nearly 300 residents, miners, merchants, families seeking fortune, and professionals hoping to serve this growing population. The Colorado Territory in 1846 was still largely untamed wilderness. The United States had only recently acquired the region through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and formal territorial government remained years away. Settlements like Silvercliff existed in a kind of legal and social isolation, where communities largely governed themselves and where professional services like medical care were precious commodities. Dr. Victor Blackwood arrived in Silvercliff in July of 1846, a seemingly fortunate addition to the growing settlement. He was 42 years old, a graduate of Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia, and carried with him impressive credentials and letters of recommendation from respected medical societies back east. He established his practice in a small cabin at the edge of town, hanging a simple sign that read, Dr. V. Blackwood, Physician and Surgeon. What the residents of Silvercliff couldn't know was that Blackwood had left Philadelphia under troubling circumstances. His former colleagues had begun questioning his research methods and ethical standards after several patients died unexpectedly during his experiments with new treatments for tuberculosis. Rather than face a formal inquiry, Blackwood had quietly departed, taking with him his medical journals and equipment, seeking a place where he could continue his work without scrutiny. Silvercliff provided the perfect laboratory for a man with Blackwood's ambitions. It was isolated, especially during winter months when mountain passes became impassable. The population was diverse in age and health status, from robust young miners to fragile elderly residents and children. Most importantly, there were no other physicians within 50 miles who might question his methods or diagnoses. In his first weeks in Silvercliff, Blackwood earned the town's trust by providing competent medical care and charging reasonable fees. He treated mining injuries, delivered babies, and offered remedies for common ailments. He appeared particularly interested in the community's general health, asking detailed questions about residents' medical histories and conducting what he called preventative examinations of many households. James Sullivan, who owned the largest general store in Silvercliff, later recalled that Blackwood seemed unusually interested in the town's water supply and food distribution systems. He asked about where people got their milk, which families shared wells, who ate at the boarding house. At the time, we thought he was being thorough, even commendable. Looking back, he was mapping how disease would spread through our community. The first case of what would later be called Silvercliff fever appeared on October 12, 1846. 7-year-old Emma Wilson developed a high fever, severe headache, and unusual purple spots on her arms and chest. Dr. Blackwood was called immediately and diagnosed the girl with mountain fever, a common term for various illnesses on the frontier. He prescribed a tonic of his own making and assured the family that with proper care, Emma would recover. 3 days later, Emma Wilson died. By then, her mother Sarah had developed similar symptoms, as had 2 neighboring children who often played with Emma. Dr. Blackwood expressed appropriate sorrow and concern, suggesting that some contagious illness must have reached Silvercliff, perhaps brought by recent arrivals from the east. Within 2 weeks, 17 people were sick with similar symptoms. The progression of the disease followed a consistent pattern: high fever and headache for the first 2 days, followed by the appearance of purple spots that spread across the torso, severe abdominal pain, and in most cases, death within 5 to 7 days. Blackwood worked tirelessly, visiting the sick, administering treatments, and advising on quarantine measures. What no one in Silvercliff knew was that each evening, Dr. Blackwood returned to his cabin and meticulously documented the spread of the disease in a leather-bound journal. His entries were clinical and detached, recording symptoms, transmission patterns, and the effectiveness of various treatments, some designed to alleviate suffering, others to prolong it for the sake of observation. October 27, 1846. Subjects 12 through 17 now showing advanced symptoms. Particularly notable is the pattern of spread among the Miller family. Subject 12, father, exposed through water supply as planned, followed by transmission to subjects 13 and 14, wife and infant, through close contact, confirming the hypothesis that transmission accelerates in confined living spaces. Subject 14 expired this evening. Progression from initial infection to death, 4 days, 7 hours. By November, the situation in Silvercliff had grown desperate. Nearly 40 people had fallen ill, and 23 had died. The community was paralyzed by fear and grief. Many families fled, seeking safety in distant settlements despite the approaching winter weather. Those who remained huddled in their homes, avoiding contact with neighbors and watching for the dreaded purple spots that signaled the disease had found them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Through it all, Dr. Blackwood moved among the sick, seemingly immune to the illness himself. He explained this as professional fortune, though in reality he had developed a vaccine before initiating the outbreak, a detail recorded in his private journal but never shared with the suffering community. The turning point came in early December when Elizabeth Chapman, the 19-year-old daughter of Silvercliff's only schoolteacher, fell ill with symptoms matching the mysterious fever. Unlike other victims, Elizabeth had received advanced education back east and maintained a detailed diary of her illness, noting her symptoms and Dr. Blackwood's treatments with unusual precision. December 3, 1846. Dr. Blackwood visited again this morning. My fever remains high. The purple spots have spread across my chest and arms. He administered a bitter tonic that made me violently ill within minutes. When I asked what was in it, he said only that it would run its course and left quickly. I feel worse after his visits, not better. Elizabeth died on December 7th, but her diary survived. Her father, Michael Chapman, grief-stricken and increasingly suspicious, began comparing notes with other families. He noticed troubling patterns, how the disease seemed to follow Blackwood's house calls, how some treatments appeared to worsen symptoms rather than relieve them, and how the doctor's interest in documenting the illness sometimes seemed to outweigh his concern for stopping it. At the same time, Thomas Reynolds, who worked as Silvercliff's postmaster, noticed something unusual about Dr. Blackwood's mail. Every 2 weeks, thick packages addressed to a Dr. Harold Wayland at Johns Hopkins University departed Silvercliff, each bearing Blackwood's return address. Reynolds, who had lost his wife and youngest son to the fever, took the unprecedented step of opening one such package before it left town. What he found inside shocked him to his core. Detailed notes on the Silvercliff experiment, including mortality rates, symptom progression, and the effectiveness of various transmission methods. Most damning was a letter in which Blackwood boasted that his controlled epidemic model was yielding invaluable data that would revolutionize our understanding of disease propagation in isolated populations. Reynolds immediately took his discovery to Robert Blackburn, who served as both mayor and judge in the small community. Together with Michael Chapman and several other prominent citizens, they formed a committee to investigate Blackwood's activities while maintaining secrecy, to prevent the doctor from fleeing or destroying evidence. The investigation proceeded cautiously over the next week. Committee members searched town records, interviewed surviving patients, and pieced together a timeline of the outbreak. The picture that emerged was damning. The disease had first appeared shortly after Blackwood had inspected the town's main well, and had spread in patterns that matched his house calls and preventative examinations. On December 18, 1846, as a heavy snow isolated Silvercliff from the outside world, Robert Blackburn led a group of 12 men to Blackwood's cabin. What they discovered there would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The cabin's main room appeared ordinary, a simple physician's office with examination table, medicine cabinet, and bookshelves lined with medical texts. But a locked door at the rear of the cabin, forced open by the search party, revealed a hidden laboratory that defied their worst suspicions. Glass containers lined wooden shelves, each holding cultures of various organisms. Detailed diagrams mapped Silvercliff's water system, with specific households marked and annotated with dates and numbers that corresponded to infection cases. Most disturbing was a large leather-bound journal titled Pathogenic Transmission Study, Silvercliff Model, that detailed Blackwood's methodical contamination of water sources, food supplies, and even medicines dispensed to the unwitting residents. The controlled nature of the Silvercliff environment exceeds my expectations, Blackwood had written. Initial introduction through the main well affected 40% of the target population within 7 days. Secondary vectors, contaminated milk supplied to boarding house, infected bandages provided to the mining company doctor, have reached an additional 30%. Subject responses vary by age and physical condition, providing excellent comparative data. Mayor Blackburn later testified that the most chilling aspect of the discovery was the complete absence of remorse or recognition of human suffering in Blackwood's notes. The residents of Silvercliff were referred to only as subjects, their deaths recorded as clinical data points in service of abstract scientific questions. When confronted with the evidence, Dr. Victor Blackwood showed neither shame nor denial. Instead, he appeared irritated at the interruption of what he considered important scientific work. "You cannot possibly understand the significance of this research," he reportedly told the stunned search party. "Medical science advances only through bold experimentation. 50 years from now, when epidemics can be controlled through understanding the principles I've documented here, history will vindicate my methods." The men of Silvercliff, many of whom had buried family members who had died terrified and in pain from Blackwood's experiment, were not inclined toward historical perspective. Justice in frontier communities often took direct forms, unburdened by formal legal procedures. The historical record is deliberately vague about exactly what happened to Dr. Victor Blackwood that snowy December night. The official report, sent to territorial authorities months later, stated only that the responsible party was addressed according to frontier justice, with no further danger to the community. Local legend, passed down through generations of Silvercliff families, holds that Blackwood was forced to consume cultures from his own laboratory before being abandoned in the mountains during the blizzard, a symmetry of suffering that matched his crimes. Whatever his fate, Victor Blackwood never again appeared in medical records or census documents. In the aftermath of the Silvercliff Epidemic, the surviving residents faced the dual challenges of grief and the approaching winter. Of the original 300 settlers, only 211 remained. 89 had died from Blackwood's deliberately spread disease, and others had fled when the outbreak began. Those who stayed worked to rebuild their community and make sense of the calculated cruelty they had experienced. The story might have remained merely a frontier tragedy, lost to history like so many others, if not for the actions of Michael Chapman. After his daughter's death, the schoolteacher dedicated himself to documenting the full extent of Blackwood's experiment. He collected testimonies from survivors, copied pages from the doctor's journals before they were burned by outraged townspeople, and compiled a comprehensive account that he sent to medical authorities in Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. I write not for justice, which can never truly be achieved after such loss, but for protection, Chapman explained in his cover letter. If the medical establishment does not acknowledge and condemn such actions by one of their own, what prevents the next ambitious doctor from finding another isolated community to use as his laboratory? Chapman's documentation sparked the first of 3 government investigations into the Silvercliff incident. In March 1847, Dr. William Thornton arrived from Washington, D.C. as a representative of the newly formed American Medical Association. His official report confirmed the deliberate nature of the outbreak and described Blackwood's actions as a profound betrayal of medical ethics and human decency without precedent in American medical history. The second investigation, conducted in 1850 by the Colorado Territorial Health Commission, focused on preventing similar incidents in frontier communities. It recommended regular inspection of medical credentials, communication networks between isolated settlements, and basic training for non-physicians in recognizing suspicious disease patterns. The third and most thorough examination came in 1872, when medical historian Dr. Eleanor Price conducted extensive interviews with surviving residents as part of her landmark study, Ethical Failures in American Medicine. Her work brought the Silvercliff Epidemic to national attention and contributed to the development of early medical ethics guidelines and research protocols. For the people of Silvercliff, however, these investigations and their resulting publications provided little comfort. The settlement never fully recovered from the tragedy. By 1855, the silver mines had been largely abandoned, and most families had relocated to larger communities. Today, only stone foundations and a small cemetery with 89 graves from the winter of 1846-47 mark where Silvercliff once stood. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror of Dr. Blackwood's case intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark historical mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content. And don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next in this investigation that would shake the foundations of medical ethics in frontier America. The most troubling aspect of Dr. Blackwood's case wasn't just the death toll, but how easily he had infiltrated the community. Frontier settlements like Silvercliff operated on trust. When someone arrived with medical credentials, few had the means or inclination to verify their authenticity. This vulnerability created perfect conditions for someone with sinister intentions to operate without oversight. But the story of what happened after the initial discovery reveals an even darker chapter that historians have only recently pieced together. Tonight, we'll examine how the medical establishment responded to evidence of one of their own committing atrocities, and the unexpected heroes who fought to ensure such experiments would never happen again. If you're finding this investigation into medical history disturbing yet fascinating, take a moment to hit the like button. Your engagement helps this channel bring more hidden stories to light. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. We dive into these forgotten chapters of history every week. The immediate aftermath of Dr. Blackwood's discovery created a crisis unlike anything Silvercliff had faced. While the community had endured the epidemic itself with remarkable resilience. The knowledge that it had deliberately caused by someone they had trusted with their lives produced a different kind of trauma, one that wouldn't be named or properly understood for more than a century. Robert Blackburn, the town's mayor and judge, faced the immediate challenge of maintaining order in a community ravaged by both disease and betrayal. His first priority was ensuring the epidemic actually ended with Blackwood's removal. To that end, he assembled a committee of the settlement's most educated residents to examine the doctor's laboratory and determine whether any continuing threat existed. Margaret Winters, the midwife who had assisted Blackwood during several childbirth cases, was among those asked to help. Though lacking formal medical training, she had practical knowledge of basic hygiene and patient care. The laboratory was unlike anything I had ever seen, she later wrote in a letter to her sister in Boston. Glass containers with substances in various colors, papers covered in strange calculations, and drawings of the human body with marks that seemed to indicate how disease would spread through it. Most troubling were maps of our town with red circles around certain homes, all places where people had died. Under Margaret's direction, the committee took the drastic step of burning Blackwood's cabin and all its contents. The decision wasn't made lightly. Valuable medical supplies were scarce on the frontier, but fear of lingering contamination outweighed all other concerns. Before the destruction, however, Michael Chapman insisted on preserving evidence of Blackwood's crimes. He copied pages from the doctor's journals and gathered letters that revealed connections to medical institutions back east. What these preserved documents revealed was far more disturbing than the isolated actions of one deranged physician. They showed that Blackwood's research had been part of a larger, though unofficial, inquiry into disease transmission that had tacit support from certain elements within prestigious medical schools. While no evidence suggested these institutions had approved his methods, correspondence showed that Blackwood had been sending regular reports to colleagues who expressed interest in his findings without asking too many questions about his methodology. Your observations from the isolated community setting provide invaluable data impossible to obtain under normal research conditions, wrote Dr. Harold Wayland of Johns Hopkins in a letter dated November 1846. The progression rates you describe are particularly intriguing. Continue your documentation with special attention to variations by age and previous health status. Whether Wayland or others knew the true nature of Blackwood's research became a central question in the investigations that followed. Correspondents carefully avoided explicit acknowledgement of deliberate infection, using euphemisms and technical language that maintained plausible deniability while encouraging continued data collection. This discovery transformed what might have remained a local tragedy into something with national implications. If respected medical institutions were willing to benefit from unethical research, even indirectly, the potential for similar incidents elsewhere increased dramatically. Michael Chapman recognized this danger immediately and made it his mission to ensure the Silvercliff epidemic would not be quietly forgotten. Chapman's efforts faced significant obstacles. Communication in 1847 was slow and unreliable, especially from remote western settlements to eastern cities. Many of his initial letters went unanswered or received dismissive replies suggesting that frontier justice had already addressed the matter, making further investigation unnecessary. "We understand your community has suffered," wrote the secretary of the Philadelphia Medical Society, but without the accused physician present to defend himself against these extraordinary claims, no formal inquiry can proceed. The matter appears to have been resolved locally, however regrettably. Such responses reflected both practical limitations and a deeper reluctance to confront the possibility that medical science could be weaponized against vulnerable populations. The idea threatened the growing public trust in physicians that medical societies had worked for decades to establish. Chapman might have abandoned his efforts if not for an unexpected ally who emerged in April 1847, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwood, recently accepted to Geneva Medical College in New York as the first woman admitted to American medical school, learned of the Silvercliff incident through family connections to Colorado Territory. Despite having no direct connection to the case, she recognized its significance for the future of medical ethics. "If we allow this precedent to stand unexamined," she wrote to Chapman, "we create space for others to exploit the vulnerable in the name of science." As someone fighting to prove that women belong in medicine precisely because we bring different perspectives and ethical frameworks, I cannot ignore such a fundamental breach of the physician's duty. Dr. Blackwood's involvement changed the trajectory of the Silvercliff story. Her position, though controversial in the medical community, gave her unique leverage. If established medical institutions wouldn't investigate Blackwood's connections, she threatened to make the case a central example in her public lectures on the need for ethical reform in medical education. This pressure, combined with Chapman's persistence, finally prompted the American Medical Association to send Dr. William Thornton to Colorado. In March 1847, his investigation produced the first official recognition of the deliberate nature of the Silvercliff Epidemic and recommended changes to credential verification procedures for frontier physicians. However, Thornton's report stopped short of examining the broader network implicated by Blackwood's correspondence. It presented the doctor as a lone aberration whose actions reflected individual pathology, rather than systemic problems within medical research practices. This framing conveniently absolved institutions of responsibility while acknowledging the Sumgung's tragedy had occurred. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwood publicly criticized these limitations. To present this case as the isolated actions of one disturbed mind ignores the correspondence showing his ongoing communication with respected physicians who expressed interest in his findings, she wrote in a letter published in several medical journals. Without addressing the demand for such knowledge and the willingness to overlook questionable methods in its pursuit, we have solved nothing. The controversy sparked by Blackwood's critique led several survivors from Silvercliff to come forward with additional details about Blackwood's time in their community. Their testimonies painted a picture of a man who had been calculating in his approach, carefully building trust before implementing his experiment. Samuel Wilson, who had lost his daughter Emma, patient 0 in the outbreak, recalled conversations with Blackwood that revealed premeditation. He asked specific questions about which families shared meals together, which children played with each other. He was mapping how sickness would spread through our connections before he ever introduced it. These testimonies reached Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., professor at Harvard Medical School and father of the future Supreme Court Justice. Holmes had recently published important work on the contagious nature of puerperal fever and the physician's responsibility in preventing its spread. The Silvercliff case represented a darkened version of his own research, a doctor deliberately causing infection rather than preventing it. Holmes launched his own unofficial inquiry, corresponding with Chapman and survivors, while examining Blackwood's educational history. What he discovered suggested that the Silvercliff epidemic was possibly not Blackwood's first experiment. Records indicate similar, though smaller, outbreaks in 3 communities where Blackwood practiced before Colorado. Holmes wrote in his private notes, which were only discovered after his death. In each case, 5 to 12 deaths occurred from unusual symptoms followed by Blackwood's relocation. No connection was made at the time due to distance between incidents and poor communication between remote medical communities. Holmes never published these findings, after receiving pressure from colleagues concerned about damage to the medical profession's reputation. Instead, he channeled his concerns into strengthening ethical components of Harvard's medical curriculum and advocating for better communication between regional medical societies. This pattern of partial acknowledgement, followed by institutional self-protection, characterized much of the official response to Silvercliff. The facts were too well documented to deny, but their implications were too threatening to fully address. As a result, early investigations produced limited reforms that focused on preventing identical incidents rather than examining the underlying attitudes that had made Blackwood's experiment possible. The residents of Silvercliff, meanwhile, faced the practical challenges of rebuilding their community while processing their collective trauma. Many found it impossible to remain in a place so thoroughly marked by death and betrayal. By spring 1847, nearly half the surviving population had departed for other settlements or returned east. Those who stayed developed informal systems to protect themselves from future exploitation. No outside professional, whether doctor, lawyer, or teacher, was accepted without verification from multiple sources. Letters were sent to institutions to confirm credentials before anyone was allowed to practice. Community members accompanied each other to medical appointments and shared information about treatments and their effects. We learned at terrible cost that credentials and confidence may disguise monsters, wrote Sarah Miller, who had lost her husband and brother to the epidemic. Now we question everything and trust only what we can verify through our own experience and the shared wisdom of neighbors. This hard-earned skepticism served the community well when, in July 1847, another physician attempted to establish practice in Silvercliff. Dr. James Morrison arrived with impressive documents from medical schools in London and New York, offering advanced treatments for mining injuries and chronic conditions common on the frontier. Robert Blackburn insisted on holding Morrison's credentials for verification before allowing him to treat patients. During the waiting period, Morrison was permitted to give lectures on health matters, but not to prescribe medications or perform procedures. When responses from both institutions revealed that no graduate by that name existed, Morrison disappeared overnight, leaving behind medical bags containing mostly colored water and chalk pills. Blackwood taught us to question authority. When lives are at stake, Blackburn later commented, it may be the only positive legacy of his time here. The most significant long-term impact of the Silvercliff epidemic emerged not from official investigations, but from the grassroots response of ordinary people determined to protect themselves and others from similar exploitation. Michael Chapman compiled his evidence and survivors' testimonies into a handbook titled The Silvercliff Warning, which circulated widely throughout Western settlements. This 70-page document included practical advice for frontier communities: how to verify medical credentials, warning signs of experimental treatment, questions to ask before accepting care, and systems for monitoring unusual illness patterns. It emphasized community oversight of all professional services and the importance of maintaining independent records of treatments and outcomes. No community should entrust its well-being entirely to a single authority, no matter how impressive their credentials, Chapman wrote in the introduction. The frontier demands self-reliance in health as in all matters. This does not mean rejecting modern medicine, but rather engaging with it as informed participants rather than passive recipients. The Silvercliff Warning spread from settlement to settlement, often carried by traders and mail carriers who had witnessed its value firsthand. By 1850, versions had reached communities across Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and Utah territories. Local groups adapted its recommendations to their specific circumstances, adding information about regional health challenges and indigenous medical knowledge that had proven effective. This movement represented a fundamental shift in how frontier communities engaged with medical authority. Before Silvercliff, doctors typically practiced with minimal oversight, their decisions rarely questioned by patients who lacked formal education. After Silvercliff, medical care became increasingly collaborative, with communities demanding explanation, transparency, and accountability. The impact of this shift extended beyond the immediate safety benefits. It created conditions where traditional healing practices, particularly those of Native American and immigrant communities, gained new legitimacy alongside formal medicine. When all authority was subject to scrutiny, multiple approaches could be evaluated on their results rather than their origin. Maria Vasquez, a curandera, traditional healer of Mexican descent who practiced in southern Colorado, noted this change in her community's records before the Anglo doctor dismissed our remedies as superstition. After the terrible events at Silvercliff became known, people began asking questions about all treatments. They discovered our herbs stopped fever as well as his powders, and without the sickness that followed his medicines. Now he consults me about local plants, and I learn from his books. The community benefits from both traditions. This pragmatic integration of diverse medical approaches became a hallmark of Western healthcare for decades, creating a uniquely American tradition of medical pluralism long before such concepts gained academic recognition. The terrible catalyst of the Silvercliff epidemic had produced an unexpected legacy of community empowerment and cross-cultural medical exchange. The official medical establishment, meanwhile, continued its pattern of limited acknowledgement and incremental reform. The Colorado Territorial Health Commission's 1850 investigation produced recommendations for credential verification and communication networks between settlements, effectively codifying practices that communities had already implemented based on Chapman's Handbook. These measures, while valuable, still framed the problem as one of individual imposters rather than addressing the ethical questions raised by Blackwood's research connections. How should medical knowledge be advanced when necessary experiments might cause harm? What oversight should exist for physicians working in isolated communities? When does the pursuit of scientific understanding cross the line into exploitation? These deeper questions remained largely unaddressed in official discourse. It would take another generation and the persistent advocacy of physicians like Elizabeth Blackwell before medical ethics became a formal component of physician training. The Silvercliff epidemic eventually took its place alongside other historical abuses as a case study in how science without ethical constraints becomes indistinguishable from cruelty. For those who lived through it, however, the epidemic was never merely a case study. It remained a defining personal tragedy and a constant reminder of human vulnerability to betrayal by trusted authorities. The 89 graves in the Silvercliff Cemetery, arranged in rows according to infection date, testified to both the methodical nature of Blackwood's experiment and the community's determination to honor each victim as an individual, not a data point. If you're finding value in uncovering these hidden historical tragedies, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Each story we examine contains lessons that remain relevant today. In our next segment, we'll explore how the survivors of Silvercliff rebuilt their lives, and how this case eventually influenced the development of modern medical ethics codes. The darkest stories often contain the seeds of important reforms, but only if we have the courage to face them honestly. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.